first and second stepping stone that we spoke about there. So they're going to partner with leading vendors. The vendors are going to provide them with configurable data sources and extreme processing. So it's kind of benefiting from that first generation. They went through the trial and error and they realized what worked. New companies coming into big data, they're going to benefit from that. So partnering with those leading vendors, they get those first two steps accomplished for them. That second step there, the maturation of emerging players, that's companies like Hadoop. What they're beginning to do is provide elastic integration. That was the third step that we talked about. So again, you're springboarding sometimes ahead of those who've been at big data for quite a while. That third step, strong partnerships, again, that's with vendors, and that's going to take care of probably the most complicated aspect of this, and that's the semantic services. So there are companies out there that are already working on this. The enterprise would be able to partner with them, and again, they get a springboard so that at the end, you're at the same finish line as those who've been, one of our slides mentioned, some have been doing this for 2 years. Well, due to the landscape and the evolution of capabilities, you can end up at the same finish line as those who've been doing this for 2 years. So there's no, you're behind, you're a laggard, we're a leader. With the technology that's available, we're all at the same pace. So what does all of this mean on the next slide? What this means is that going forward, as I mentioned, you're going to see data architecture transition from being a sculpted process to a service-oriented process, right? So it's going to be characterized by data service deployment. What this is going to require from EA practitioners is that we have to adjust our current assumptions and principles, right? We have to adapt a more agile approach to things. We have to create data management reference architectures that's flexible. You might need to set up something one day and tear it down the next week to provide a different type of service. So there's going to need to be flexibility. We're going to have to embrace federation and virtualization, and that has to do with the first two steps. We're going to have to use business scenarios and policies as our architectural drivers, right? So we're going to create strategies for our data management investment, but we're going to have to look at things a little bit differently and focus on the scenarios and policies. And the third thing, governance is going to be flexible across the entire system. So with those 5 points that we brought out, the things that we have here as far as what it all means, that's going to be possible for any enterprise architect who's willing to have an innovative approach and work really hard to transform their enterprise, if it's not already in an innovator state, to help get it to that point. And the governance issue goes into security, and that's something that Josh is going to talk with you about now.
Thanks, Daphne. So, cybersecurity, any type of security always makes people nervous because either they really understand it and they know what horrible things can happen, or they don't understand it and are worried about what horrible things could happen. But there really is a unique perspective with regard to big data. And this graphic here is a good representation of it. Binary numbers here mean nothing to us. So we just a bunch of ones and zeros that kind of our mind blanks over. And big data could be a lot like this. Even if you or your organization doesn't have the tools to process big data or understand what you have, there are people out there who do, whether they be professionals, enterprise architects, or otherwise, who are working for you, or someone who's malicious and is a lot like this person with the tweezers pulling a password out. Just because we don't necessarily understand how to extract that information doesn't mean that there isn't a big risk of the data that we're sitting on top of at any given time. And this word cloud here is created from 3 published papers using, they're supposed to be on big data and security. And the thing that I think is visually striking and is what was found when actually reviewing these papers is there's no overwhelming word or 2 words or 3 words. I mean, yeah, some are bigger than others and probably words you might expect, but there does not seem to be a very good general consensus on what security means in a big data context. So there are a lot of opinions, there are a lot of suggestions, there are best practices, so on and so forth, but there isn't consistency yet. This is a new layer of a new area for opportunity. There's for research, establishing what are the best practices. There is a real chance to make an impact in this sense. One of the ways that security can be thought of in context of this class is the fact that it does cut across all lines of business and all components. Big data is not just the data that's collected about other people. It's also the data we collect about our systems, about our organizations, about our own internal applications. And when you have something like the security aspect, the artifacts created, the people involved, if they are properly trained on big data and understand the tools available and the ways that the metrics can be applied, well, now you can find patterns of activity that might indicate a compromise in your own network or might indicate fraud or any number of things that otherwise would be contained within a single line of business or a single department. Collecting this data is also excellent for forensic activity. There's no such thing as perfect security. I think that I heard somebody say once, can you make this secure? And the answer is, well, only if you promise to never use it again. So there's always going to be a need for forensics. And the more data you're able to collect, now that storage is cheap compared to what it has been for a long time, that's a way that big data can be utilized with regard to security that stripes across everything that we've looked at with regard to EA. Of course, there is the other side, not the data that we have internally, but the data we might collect on business partners, customers, and our obligation to protect that data and the consequences that come along with not protecting that data. If you're not familiar with the term personally identifiable information, PII, it is anything that can be used to associate a person with a valuable piece of data. For example, your name alone is not PII, and your social security number alone is not PII. But you put the two together, and now it is. Now you have something that's valuable to identity thieves, to anyone who might want to abuse that data in any way. And this can have very severe consequences if it's collected on purpose or by mistake. It doesn't really matter the people whose data it is. They don't care if you did it on purpose or not. They just care if it might get compromised. At Penn State, there were, I know, a number of data loss incidents over the last 5 years or more, and they quickly learned the laws in Pennsylvania basically boil down to, if you even suspect that data may have been lost, then you need to act as if it had been. And with big data, this becomes even more important because the numerous websites, applications, that all of the avenues of input that we might accidentally end up with information that is valuable. If someone could scan and email their driver's license, well, the company has a copy of that somewhere in terabytes or exabytes or whatever of data. That is a concern. Again, this comes back to understanding that which you have inside of these massive reams of data. And the consequences of not being a good steward of this are financially severe. Many people end up paying for credit monitoring or such, but they can also be very perceptually severe. If your organization is known as one that doesn't take good care of customer data or partner data, well, nobody's going to want to do business with you. And of course, things like FERPA and HIPAA that sort of force us to be good citizens, so to speak, are always on the radar as well. Jumping in a little bit to the, yeah, just as target, right? Yes, jumping into some of the survey results here. These are some of the type of analytics that they're certainly not exclusive to security, but they're very applicable to a security position. You know, what happened? Why did it happen? What might happen? And you start moving from the post-mortem to predictive. You know, what if security was not reacting to an incident or fraud? What if it was being able to predict the situations that you need to pay closer attention to? And this is the last slide I'm going to talk about, and then I'll pass it on. But I just want to pause a moment because I was really surprised by this result, and mostly because I personally thought that statistics would be off the chart and databases would be off the chart, but there was a lot of variation, and we had another result like this as well, but there was a lot of variation in what people thought were the skills in drawing value out of big data. So I think this again goes back to the idea of that infographic, that even though it seems like every time we turn around we hear big data, it's still a young thing. There's a lot we still have to learn about what it is, how to use it, and so forth. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jyothi, and she's going to talk about ethical discussion.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, class. Last but not least, I'd like to present the topic of ethics in the use of big data. Gartner says that firms who maintain best practices for privacy in digital commerce will gain about 5 to 10% more revenue than competitors who do not. And also by 2018, 50% of business ethics violations will occur through improper big data use. Big data provides enormous benefits, but also bring real-world concerns, which include a serious risk to reputation. Regulatory compliance has already proven not to be enough. To address these concerns, information and analytics leaders should initiate a serious debate about what are the right and wrong uses of data and follow it up with actions to mitigate the risks. Can we go to the next slide, please, Hayden? Okay, here you see Scott Adams' Dilbert characters debating ethics and big data usage. I'll give you a few seconds to go over this. Now I'd like to poll the class. Please hit yes if you agree with Dogbert and no if you do not agree with Dogbert. Can you see the results, Hayden? Okay, we have 9 saying they disagree and 4 saying yes. That's good. At least 9 of them are. We have majority disagreeing with that. Can we go to the next slide, please, Hayden? Here you see, I'll give you a few seconds to take this in. So they are charging time to the customer they hate the most. So if you base any decisions on such kind of analytics, that's a limitation. Can we go to the next slide, please, Hayden? Here we have the major risk to where you can be liable for damages. So if they had debated this, do you think they'd have still gone down the path they did? Well, we hope not. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here we come to some real concerns. And Gartner's study showed that risk and governance are major concerns immediately after value and finding the right skills. The first one, anonymization and data masking could be impossible. Large data sets are often subjected to an anonymization process that enables data to be used for marketing or scientific research without the potential for leakage of information about the individuals. However, no useful database can ever be perfectly anonymous. The triple identifier of birthday, gender, and zip code is all that someone needs to uniquely identify at least 87% of US citizens in publicly available databases. Then you have the second risk, protect people from themselves. You all see people behaving carelessly on the social media, announcing they're on vacation, etc. So that's definitely a risk. And then there's the easy to mistake patterns for reality. Authorities can conduct mass analytic exercises and go on a fishing expedition in which any person fitting a certain pattern becomes a suspect. For crime prevention purposes, there is a direct issue with the constitutional presumption of innocence. In business, a pattern does not necessarily equate to behavior. You have the data becomes reality itself. There's a Facebook example we'll go over in the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please, Hayden? Here I presented some real-world cases. Anonymization, a Harvard professor was able to re-identify, and he did this just to show that, hey, it's not as anonymous as everyone thinks it is. Protect people from themselves. There are sites that tell you, hey, you're vulnerable for attack based on your social messages. And then the data becomes reality itself. You have Facebook, where Facebook fed positive emotional content for 700,000 users and less negative content for the others, and then tracked what they posted after that. So these are all the risks and real cases which should cause us great concern. Next slide, please, Hayden. So based on all the risks, it seems common sense to have a debate in your organization. So how would you set up a structure the debate in your organization? You could start by taking some real world cases. Which side would you take? What other arguments can you come up with? What would you do in these situations? Next, you apply this to your own organization. Take a big data analytics initiative from your organization, identify the stakeholders and their requirements, identify the data available about stakeholders and target it at stakeholders. Consider whether the use of data is in the best interest of the stakeholder. In more general terms, the more you do that is in the interest of all, the less likely you are to run into ethical problems. When in doubt, treat others as you would like to be treated. Based on this debate, you can come up with the code of conduct. The code of conduct can contain principles that describe what the company finds inappropriate and appropriate, a process that describes the ethical checks and balances when conducting big data analytics, a checklist or set of guidelines for analysts to consider, including questions like, hey, are there any legal implications using this data set? Does the intended use of the data match the original purpose of measurement? Are you using the data as was originally intended? Could any stakeholder object to the outcome of the analysis? Does the intended outcome pass the Wall Street Journal test? Are you comfortable if this becomes public? An escalation process in case ethical issues are raised within the company or from stakeholders outside. Although the code of conduct can be developed by specialists, it's better if top-down support is available, because if more than one group is involved, that's always much better. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, this is the recommendations where this is recommendations from everything that we've all spoken about. So I won't go through each one in the interest of time. You can read this after you get we make the presentation available. If you go to the next slide, please. Summary. Davenport rather sums it up well when he says the sweeping changes in big data technologies and management approaches need to be accompanied by similarly dramatic shifts in how data supports decisions and product service innovation. So I think that's, can we go to the next slide? I think that's it for us from the big data team. Hope you enjoyed our presentation.
Thank you. I learn something all the time from you guys. Thank you. Thank you for that nice presentation. Oh, I see FIPO is in here. Good, good. Any questions for the big data team? You're all pretty quiet out there.
That's either really good or really bad.
I know. Yeah, I know. I know. I see how I
So
feel.
I'm just.
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether in doing this research on big data, did they identify certain markets where big data is more heavily utilized than others?
They did, and it's a moving target right now, being that a lot of organizations are still trying to understand how they can use big data. The top three industries that became common throughout a lot of the research I did was healthcare, the financial industry, and also the energy and utility industry. And speaking from experience and being part of one of the enterprise architects on a big data project at work, big data itself and understanding how to optimize the grid has become very mainstream with a lot of utility companies to better understand energy consumption, especially when you get into like California during the warm summer months. They go into those brownout periods because they just don't have enough energy to supply all the facilities. They've been using big data analytics to predict when that peak energy usage would happen and be able to expand capacity to be able to meet that demand. And that's how a lot of utility industry has been doing it. Healthcare and others I'm not so familiar with, but they are two of the other big adopters of big data.
Anything else? Jaffe.
I'm good, but class, any questions on anything any of us presented? Ask, please. Something.
So another thing that I had in mind too is, are there regulatory issues around big data? Is that, in terms of governmental compliance?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, they are actually encouraging public and businesses to have more debates for the regulations, and that's actually in the works. And there are some. Hold on, I have actually noted it down because I thought it might be important. There are associations like Data Science Association. They have something called accredited members and regular members. They don't enforce it. They're more on educating. And I think the one accredited members may enforce certain things on them. And there's American Statistical Association. They are just, again, educating, I think. And Digital Analytics Association, which is created, but they do not enforce the Web Analysts Code of Ethics. And there's a lot of action, but Europe is a little bit ahead in that. Human dignity and other things, they are actually developing some regulations around this. But digital society is growing faster than the regulation.
Yeah, I mean, I know at least in my organization, I mean, Europe is league years and years ahead as far as personal data privacy, just from the aspect of employees. Germany especially. I mean, there's just stuff that we do every day, all day, to United States-based employees that we couldn't even dream about doing to a German employee.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll go to the discussion PowerPoint. All right. Thank you, Big Data. I'm going to take over now. Okay. Presentation. I just want to switch. So the discussion is very good this week. It's good every week, really. So here's what I gleaned from the posts. Three three major themes: organizational readiness, data retention and legal issues, and EA's role. I love this, Jennifer. Currently, big data is a big scramble in my organization. Here's another one, Cynthia. I liked this, Cynthia. At my organization, no business partner ever requested big data. Rather, our business partners are asking for enterprise-wide reports that span multiple systems and real-time and predictive analysis. These business requests are why we need big data. Nice, because we'll see that's not always the case. Hayden, my organization is revisiting big data after an unsuccessful first attempt was made several years ago. Now that the EA program has matured in the organization, there is much tighter control on strategic initiatives. During the revised initiative, the target outcome of how the data was to be used was first developed. The target outcome of how the data was to be used was first developed. Once we understood the target, we then started addressing how to implement the right technologies and determine what type of analysis was to be done with the data, right? So we can't forget, yay, a business purpose first. What a concept. I know, right? What a concept. What are the requirements? What are we trying to do with the big data? As organizations and jump into something new, sometimes it's just to do it. Then you have to step back and say, okay, well, what really? Why are we doing this? So John, right. We received very little requests to implement changes to the data warehouse, which highlighted the fact many business stakeholders refuse to change their sources for retrieving data. I like that. And Michael, I think, responded, data ownership and letting that go can be more a cultural change than a technological one. My dog is making a lot of sounds, right? So, getting the culture ready. It's always the case with technology. Justin commented, when considering future views of our enterprise, the necessity of infrastructure able to support the storage and transfer of extremely large data files is a major factor. Within our department, we've created are you ready for this? 5-year plan that details upgrade cycles for our hardware with big data in mind. Within the organization as a whole, they have established a center dedicated to meeting these needs. What do you think? A plan. What a concept. As a couple of you brought up, data retention and legal issues. What's this plan you speak of? Some of the more I love the way you put this, Bram. Some of the more tenured folks keeping records back decades after they should. It's a similar issue as my comment from last week about end users being restricted to security policies. The chances of any individual user's data being subpoenaed is comparatively low to the convenience of being able to bust out an email from 8 years ago to prove that Mary did, in fact, approve the initiative that is now failing. How long do you keep your emails?
The official policy is 2 years.
2 years?
In practice, it's as long as you've been there.
Yeah. The average default is eternity. I like that. And Heather comment, the organization I work for is pretty well defined, has pretty well defined data retention policies. Most records need special permission to access after a certain period of time. This makes policy adherence much less of a problem. Okay, so all these comments over here was, we just did a data inventory. There's documents older than me. That's from Hayden. Josh, that's awesome and terrifying, Michael, in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. EA's role. Okay, EA's role. So where is EA in the big data besides the data architects? So Jonathan, my organization is starting to use big data, but not in any seemingly managed way. Our EA team has put out some guidance, but more along the lines of, here's a list of standards, pick one. Nice. Let's all work there. Hayden again. Hayden, we heard a lot from you. The data architects worked in a vacuum away from the enterprise architects until only recently, and the relationship is still loosely coupled. And then we get into business analytics. So we have the business analytics or business intelligence people. We have the big data people. We have EAs, turf wars. EA involvement, visual rates. EA involvement in adopting big data is still at minimal because my organization is still treating that as a new technology. Although information architecture team is very much involved to create a repeatable and reusable infrastructure, and in turn the reference architecture for the same. Jonathan must work for the government. Good guess. Google tells me a lot more than that. Nice. So, Vishal, that seems positive. Let's see. Jennifer, again, we are trying to prioritize how to address collecting and organizing the data first. Nice idea. This is being sculpted by the intended use of the data. First, we asked, what is the data being used for? Then we asked, what analysis will provide us with an answer? That seems like such a logical way to do things. John, our EA team is collaborating with the BI team to define a roadmap that will help the BI team achieve their desired future state and define the appropriate sequence. Also, the EA team has been instrumental in helping put context and understanding between the data that is captured to many of the questions. Anyway, I think I'm being overrun by the chit chat, but that's fine, and give you guys a chance to interact. Any comments that anyone wants to speak? Evidently not. Okay. Well, y'all, is it because it's a nice warm spring night? Not in January or February? All right. Well, I'm kind of lonely here, but that's all right. So if I go and look at that, and do a refresh, I will tell you 9 of you have completed the rate teaching. And I'll just say that 9 out of 29 is abysmal. So please take a couple minutes and complete it. Okay, I agree with Hayden. What did Hayden say? Brain dead. Okay. Oh, you guys. It only lets me do it once. Okay. Well, another nice Tuesday night on my end. I hope you have had a nice time with all of us. So without further ado, I guess we are good to go. And until next Tuesday, I want to see you all back here, and we'll get the result of whether there's a test or not. So complete those surveys. Just joking, of course. Hello, doggy. All right. Thanks, guys, gals. Good night. Always a fun time.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Gonna miss this class.
Thanks, Doctor.
All right, doggy.